In 1905, a glass plate negative was created at a place called the Blackwood Creek Asylum. The image was simple. It showed a garden. Men and women in plain clothes worked the soil. They planted seeds and tended to rows of vegetables. Nurses in white uniforms stood at the edge of the garden. They watched the workers. The sky was overcast. The scene looked calm and productive. This photograph had been lost for over a century. The photo was found recently by a man named Hayes. Hayes worked as an archivist at a small regional historical society. One afternoon, he opened a cardboard box that had been donated years earlier. Inside were old papers and fragile items. At the bottom of the box was the glass plate. It was wrapped in yellowed newspaper. A paper label was taped to the wrapping. The label read, "Asylum Grounds, 1905. Hayes held the plate up to the light. The image was remarkably clear. He knew this was important. Very few photographs from inside the Blackwood Creek Asylum had survived. The Blackwood Creek Asylum was not a peaceful place. Hayes knew the stories. The asylum had a dark reputation in the region. It was a place of last resort. Families sent relatives there when they had nowhere else to turn. A historian named Jett had studied the asylum for years. Jett explained that the facility was feared by the local population. In 1905, the asylum was run by a superintendent named Cole. Cole was known throughout the state. He wrote articles for medical journals. He promoted what he called experimental therapies. He claimed these methods could cure mental illness. The public did not trust him. The asylum's walls were high. Few people knew what happened inside. The photograph, therefore, presented a contradiction. The image showed calm workers in a sunlit garden. The asylum's history suggested something very different. Hayes studied the glass plate more closely. The negative was in excellent condition. The details were sharp. He could see the faces of the gardeners. He could see the buttons on the nurses' uniforms. In the background, the main asylum building rose behind the garden. It was a large brick structure with rows of windows. Hayes noticed something odd. In one of the high windows, there was a blur. It looked like a smudge or a stain on the glass. Hayes assumed it was water damage. The plate was over 100 years old. Damage was expected. Hayes decided to send the photograph to experts. There was an institute called the Harrington University Photo Archive Institute. The institute specialized in preserving old images. They used advanced technology to scan historical photographs and documents. Hayes packaged the glass plate carefully. He wrote a note explaining the find. He mentioned the smudge in the window. He asked the institute to scan the image and add it to the state's digital database. A few days later, the package arrived at the institute. It was received by a woman named Elliot. Elliot was the lead photo analyst at the institute. Her job was to create digital copies of fragile historical items. The Harrington University Photo Archive Institute had state-of-the-art equipment. They could scan images at extremely high resolution. This allowed researchers to see details that were invisible to the naked eye. Elliot was not a historian. She was a technical specialist. She worked with cameras, computers, and software. Elliot placed the glass plate on the scanning bed. She adjusted the settings to capture every detail. The machine began its work. The process took several hours. While the scan was running, Elliot read the note from Hayes. She learned about the asylum. She learned about the garden. She learned about the smudge. The Blackwood Creek Asylum had a history that needed to be understood. Jett, the historian who had studied the facility, knew the details well. During the era when Cole was superintendent, the asylum promoted a specific image. Cole wrote about work therapy in his articles. He claimed that physical labor in fresh air could heal the mind. The garden photograph was likely part of this propaganda. It was meant to show the public that his methods worked. It was meant to prove that patients were being treated humanely. But Jett knew the truth was more complicated. A medical historian named Jesus had researched asylums from this period. Jesus explained what experimental therapies actually meant in 1905. These treatments were harsh. Patients were subjected to hydrotherapy, which involved being sprayed with high-pressure water. They were placed in isolation boxes for days at a time. They were given electroshock treatments without anesthesia. These practices were common at the Blackwood Creek Asylum. Jesus had reviewed the few surviving records. The asylum was overcrowded. Many patients were admitted and never released. Records of their care were sparse or non-existent. Elliott's scan was complete. The digital image appeared on her computer screen. It was incredibly sharp. Elliott zoomed in on different parts of the photograph. She examined the faces of the gardeners. Some looked calm, others looked blank. She studied the nurses. Their expressions were stern. Then Elliott focused on the background. The main asylum building stood tall behind the garden. She found the smudge that Hayes had mentioned. It was in a window on the 3rd floor. Elliott zoomed in on that section of the image. Immediately she realized this was not water damage. There was something inside the window. Elliott isolated the small portion of the negative that contained the window. She began to magnify it. The digital tools allowed her to zoom far beyond what anyone in 1905 could have seen. The image pixelated at first. Then it refocused. Elliott adjusted the contrast and brightness. Shapes began to emerge. At first, they were just shadows. But as Elliott refined the image, a face became visible. It was pressed against the glass. The face was pale. The expression was desperate. Elliott felt a chill. This was not supposed to be in the photograph. Elliott contacted Hayes immediately. She also reached out to Jett. She sent them the enlarged image. She asked a simple question. What was the 3rd floor window? Jett went to work. He found the original blueprints for the Blackwood Creek Asylum in the state archives. The blueprints were dated 1898. Jett studied the layout of the 3rd floor. He found the answer. The 3rd floor was not used for regular patients. It was called the isolation wing. Jesus, the medical historian, explained what this meant. The isolation wing was reserved for the most difficult cases. Patients who were deemed dangerous or disruptive were kept there. They were placed in small rooms. The rooms had no light. The patients were kept in total darkness and solitude. This was considered therapy. The contradiction was now clear. While some patients were outside for a photograph, others were locked away directly above them. The peaceful garden scene was staged. It was propaganda. But the camera had accidentally captured more than Cole intended. It had captured a patient in the isolation wing, looking down at the garden they were forbidden from entering. Hayes began searching through the asylum's records. He looked for intake logs from 1905. He wanted to know who had been in the isolation wing. The records were incomplete. Many pages were missing. But one name appeared repeatedly in the nursing notes. The name was Ace. The notes described Ace as agitated and prone to window gazing. The nurses had written that Ace spent hours at the window. They wrote that Ace refused to eat. They wrote that Ace scratched at the walls. Elliott returned to the digital scan. She decided to push the magnification even further. She was no longer focused on the face. She wanted to see what was around the face. She zoomed in on the glass of the window itself. The image resolved slowly. Elliott saw handprints. They were on the inside of the glass. The prints were frantic. They overlapped each other. There were dozens of them. It looked like someone had been pressing their hands against the glass over and over again. Elliott zoomed in on the wooden frame around the window. Another detail emerged. There were scratches in the wood. Elliott enhanced the image. The scratches were not random. They were tally marks. Someone had carved lines into the wood. There were hundreds of them. They were grouped in sets of 5. Someone had been counting the days. The truth was now undeniable. The peaceful photograph of the garden was a lie. The image had accidentally captured 2 realities at the same time. The foreground showed the asylum's propaganda. It showed smiling nurses and productive patients. The background showed the truth. It showed a forgotten patient, possibly Ace, locked away in isolation. The patient was counting the days. The patient was pressing their hands against the glass. The patient was staring down at the very garden they could never enter. Jett explained the significance of this discovery. The photograph was no longer a simple historical record. It was a piece of evidence. It proved the disparity of treatment at the Blackwood Creek Asylum. It proved that the public image was staged. It proved that while some patients were used for propaganda, others were hidden away and forgotten. Hayes continued his search through the asylum's records. He wanted to know what happened to Ace. He found more nursing notes. They described Ace's condition worsening. They described Ace refusing to speak. They described Ace becoming violent when moved away from the window. Finally, Hayes found the last entry. It was dated December 1905. The entry simply read, "Transferred." Jesus, the medical historian, explained that transferred was often a euphemism. It usually meant the patient had died. There was no record of Ace after that date. The experts reflected on what they had found. Elliot said that technology had given a voice to someone who had been silenced. The smudge in the background was now a story. It was a person. It was proof that Ace had existed. Jett said that history is often hidden in the margins. It is hidden in the background of photographs. It is hidden in the details that were not meant to be seen. The Harrington University Photo Archive Institute decided to recatalog the photograph. It was no longer called Asylum Grounds 1905. It was now named the Ace Window. This ensured that the patient would not be forgotten again. The 1905 photograph was a mask. It showed what Cole wanted the world to see. But technology, combined with historical investigation, had peeled back that mask. The experts had revealed what was hidden. They had given context to a blur. They had turned a smudge into a story. The photograph now serves as a reminder. It reminds us that old images may contain secrets. It reminds us that the past is more complex than it appears. Every detail matters. Every shadow could be a clue. Other photographs from other asylums exist in archives around the world. They are waiting to be scanned. They are waiting to be enlarged. What other truths are hidden in the backgrounds of old images? What other voices are waiting to be heard? This discovery at the Blackwood Creek Asylum proves that modern technology can bring history to light. It can reveal the stories that were meant to stay hidden. It can honor the people who were forgotten. The story of the 1905 photograph is complete, but the work continues. Archivists like Hayes continue to search through old boxes. Analysts like Elliot continue to scan fragile negatives. Historians like Jett and Jesus continue to piece together the past. Each discovery adds to our understanding. Each enlarged image reveals a new truth. The Ace Window is one photograph. It is one story, but it represents thousands of untold stories from the same era. Subscribe to learn about more hidden histories. Support the work of archivists and historians who bring these stories to light. The past is not truly past until it is understood. Every old photograph deserves a second look. Every blur deserves investigation. The Blackwood Creek Asylum is now closed. The building still stands, empty and decaying, but the photograph remains. It has been preserved. It has been enlarged. And now it has been understood. The garden scene that once looked peaceful is now recognized for what it truly was: a staged image, a propaganda tool, and, accidentally, a window into suffering. Technology allowed experts to see what Cole did not intend to show. The camera captured more than he realized. It captured Ace at the window. It captured the handprints on the glass. It captured the tally marks on the wood. It captured a moment of desperation that lasted over a century before being discovered. This is the power of preservation. This is the importance of looking closely. This is why archives matter. Hayes has continued his work at the Historical Society. He now examines every donated item with extreme care. He knows that any object could contain a hidden story. Elliot has trained other analysts to look beyond the obvious subjects in photographs. She teaches them to examine the backgrounds and the margins. Jett has written papers about the Blackwood Creek Asylum. He uses the photograph as evidence of the conditions inside. Jesus has added the story to his research on asylum treatments. He uses it to illustrate the gap between public perception and private reality. The photograph has been exhibited in museums. It has been used in documentaries. It has been studied by students. The story of ACE has reached thousands of people. It has sparked conversations about mental health care. It has raised questions about how society treats its most vulnerable members. It has reminded people that history is not just about kings and wars. It is also about individuals who suffered in silence. It is about the forgotten and the overlooked. The 1905 glass plate negative is now stored in a climate-controlled vault. It is protected for future generations. The digital scan is available online. Anyone can view it. Anyone can zoom in on the window. Anyone can see the face pressed against the glass, the handprints, the tally marks. These details are no longer hidden. They are no longer a blur. They are evidence. They are testimony. They are a voice from the past. What other truths are waiting to be discovered? What other photographs contain hidden stories? The work of preserving and examining history never ends. Every archive contains mysteries. Every old negative could reveal something unexpected. The tools exist to uncover these secrets. The question is whether we will take the time to look. The experts who worked on the Blackwood Creek photograph did. They enlarged it. They investigated it. They gave it context. And in doing so, they honored a person who had been forgotten for over 100 years.